And we are back. Our featured guest tonight has spent his life studying the history of our Gulf Coast and the cities and cultures that call it home. He is currently the architectural historian for the Mobile Historical Development Committee, and he has authored multiple books detailing the amazing history of our area. His new book, The Gulf of Mexico, may be his best achievement yet. And he's here to chat about it. Let's give a warm weekly show welcome to author John Sledge. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate it.
Now, many of our locals have heard of you at one point or another, but not as many in our extended viewing area. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm an architectural historian for the City of Mobile, the Historic Development Commission. I'm going to say architectural historian. That sounds more highfalutin than it is. I tell people it's neither historian nor architect. So we do historic preservation, basically. We work with old buildings. But I've had a lifelong interest in the history of the Gulf Coast. My mom grew up partially in New Orleans, including living a stint in the Pontaba building as a child. My dad grew up in Mobile. So throughout childhood, we would come down here because I was raised near Birmingham. And the coast just seemed more exotic to me, more interesting. The people living and dead were more colorful. And it had just had so much fantastic history that I have always been attracted by that, and really moved to delve into it more deeply and share what I found.
Now, I know a lot of your time has been spent working in areas of history, architecture, and writing. How did all of those things come together for you? I mean, I know that you're saying that you came from here, and how did it all just eventually mesh, I guess?
Well, for me, I've never really been able to separate history from literature. To me, the best history is really written as literature. Too often history is dry. When we go through school, it's boring. You know, the textbook says, in case of flood, stand on this, it's dry. I've really wanted to make it more accessible just for the lay reader and not laden with jargon and theoretical concepts, because it's so colorful and it's so fascinating. And it really is about story. And then also, I've been fascinated by the linkage of history to place. And on the Gulf, you really get that so strongly in cities like New Orleans, Mobile, Pensacola, Biloxi. Not only the live oaks and the sand and the smell of the salt air, but the Indian mounds, such as you have there in downtown Fort Walton, forts like on Ship Island in Mississippi, Fort Pickens, Fort Morgan and Gaines in Mobile Bay. You're just surrounded by the past, and you can't escape the reality. Then you drive down our oak-shaded streets, and you see all the columned buildings and all the historic neighborhoods. You really start to be impressed with how far back this area goes and how visible, what a stamp it's put on the present. And so I've been fascinated to investigate not only that through material culture, but also in terms of how did it affect the architecture, the cuisine, the speech. All of these things were really the result of centuries of mixing throughout the Gulf Basin.
And why do you think a lot of us are so, for lack of a better way of putting it, clueless of the history immediately around us, especially when our Gulf Coast is clearly so abundantly rich with it, as you've just explained?
Well, I think a lot of people sort of grow up with the idea that history happens somewhere else to other people. And as Shakespeare said, there's history in all men's lives. And certainly when I went through elementary school, we learned about the Pilgrims. We learned about Jamestown. We didn't learn about the Gulf Coast. And of course, now Alabama history is only available in fourth grade here. They've taken it out of the ninth grade text. I'm not sure in Florida, Mississippi, or Louisiana what it's like. So we really grow up ignorant of the history around us. We might see certain landmarks and have a vague idea that something happened there. But we're busy, we go about our lives, and we don't necessarily think about how it might have impacted us or how it might still steer attitudes about the present and so forth. And I think we've all really gotten a lesson in that through the Black Lives Matter movement and the recent controversy of Confederate monuments, such as you had in Mobile. The Admiral Sims statue was taken down. Pensacola, there's been some controversy there as well, as well as Biloxi. So people have started to think about, what do these monuments mean? What did the Confederacy stand for? What did the people put up the monuments? What were they trying to say? What were they thinking? And it's really forced us into a dialogue with our past that I think, though some people haven't been comfortable with it, I think has been very helpful.
We just had Ben Raines on the show recently, and we talked about the Clotilda. And I guess most Mobilians had no real idea of that history before the discovery got all the media attention.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Clotilda has been an incredible story, really of worldwide importance. And I think a lot of local people in Mobile Bay knew about it vaguely, but not a lot of detail. And what's been fascinating about the story of the discovery is the way some of the descendants now have become publicly visible through various film projects, magazine and newspaper pieces. Anderson Cooper's recent coverage on 60 Minutes, where many of them were interviewed, and people have really begun to see the direct connection with the past, these people and the lives they've lived, to that incredible experience and those original folks that were brought over. It's really an amazing lesson about the presence of the past.
Now, as the architectural historian for the Mobile Historical Development Committee, I guess what can you tell us about the architectural history specifically of our city and our area? Because there are times in which in many ways it looks like New Orleans, but in other ways it doesn't. And you know, there's French, there's Spanish, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, certainly when you drive down our streets, you're struck by the monumental architecture buildings like Barton Academy and in downtown Mobile, or in Pensacola, the Sanger Theater, and certainly marvelous examples, the Cabildo and the St. Louis Cathedral and Jackson Square in New Orleans. So these are buildings that have really become landmarks. They're on postcards. Everybody knows a little bit about them. But what's fascinating are the warp and the woof that connects all of them, the neighborhood streets. Government Street, you go down Mobile, it's lined with oaks. You see all these beautiful mansions. But if you go off a block or two in either direction, you see more modest homes of the middle class. And then a few blocks further on, and you'll see the shotgun houses of the working classes. So you really get a very complete picture of social class through architecture in these places. And you also get a sense of how the architecture defines place. Though we have a lot of historic houses, they're different from what you might have in Nashville or Memphis or Atlanta. They built for the climate here. Porches are very important. We also have cast iron. The Gulf Coast is really famous for that. You see these marvelous veranda fences with ornamental ironwork. Then you'll see the houses raised up off the ground on piers to allow air underneath them. So they didn't have central heat and air then, and they very much had to pay attention to where they were and how they built. And here
all this time, I thought it was because we were so close to the water that it was raised to minimize surge issues, but you're saying it was because of climate and for airflow. And that's something I never knew until you just said that.
Yeah, and and yes, they didn't have paving, so the ground was muddy and all of that, but they were typically built on piers. They weren't raised up high enough. Typically 2 to 3 feet was, now some you'll see higher, but most of them, it was just a matter of that's how they built, and the more air you can get, none of them were insulated, so they'd be cold in the winter. But in the summer, they're remarkably habitable without air conditioning.
What do you think makes the architecture of Mobile so special or so much different from I guess, other places? Is it that so much of it has managed to survive? Because Mobile is a remarkably old city, just as Pensacola and St. Augustine.
Exactly. No, a lot of it has survived. We often compare ourselves to Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans. They all have great laboratories of historic buildings, but it is the fact that we have so much, and we have so much variety. It isn't just the mansions. It's everything from the shotgun houses and the Creole cottages up to the Greek Revival mansions and the Victorian Queen Anne houses of the lumber magnates and so forth. So it really is the variety as much as anything that we still have.
So, John, I want to come back and I want to talk a little bit about your book. We've got to go to a quick commercial break. I presume you can stick around a little bit?
Of course.
Okay. We'll be right back after these messages with author John Sledge.